Dealing with chronic physical pain, with fibromyalgia, with gastrointestinal disorders can be really devastating, and you might find yourself sliding down a spiral of despair. You might have run from doctor to doctor, tried all sorts of supplements or new beds or mattresses or other devices, and have not found a solution. Well, there might be a very surprising answer or solution to your problem. Check out this interview about how to deal with chronic pain from a psychologist's perspective. Well, welcome and hi, everybody. Today, I have the immense pleasure of talking with Dr. Dan Ratner. Dr. Ratner, Dan, is from Ohio originally. He started his career as a teacher with Teach for America, teaching in Compton, California, before he studied psychology, got his master's and his PhD, and started his private practice. He then suffered from chronic pain, unexplained chronic pain, and Dan will tell us about it, but there was a lot of suffering and it was really devastating. And he sort of felt himself spiral down, as many people do when they suffer from chronic pain. And then he found a very surprising and fascinating solution through the work of Dr. Sarno and TMS. And don't worry about these words, we'll explain what they are. But first of all, I want to check with Dr. Dan, what does a psychologist have to offer for chronic pain? Wouldn't you go to a neurologist or an orthopedic doctor? Tell us more.
The thing that I think the first place I would start is that what we have here is a conundrum that isn't solved by any one profession. So one of the problems that we have is you can't go to any one profession and get a good answer. You're getting parts of the answers. And what I've found in terms of being a psychologist is I try not to let my degree limit me too much in what I can weigh in on. However, I'm also very careful not to blur boundaries or assert things that I can't know outside of the realm of my profession. So what I do is I use the other professions to confirm what it is that I'm looking at. And so I might work with a neurologist or work with an orthopedist or some doctor that can confirm, hey, there's nothing very clearly medically wrong here. Once that's done, once I feel that the doctor's done it, then I feel like, okay, now I can really dive in to the fact that the mind and body are one and that somebody's got to get in there and be able to describe it. And in a way, I feel like I might be the most qualified. I don't mean just me particularly, but a psychologist who understands these things might be the most qualified, because I find it's harder for people outside of the field of psychology to really understand what's happening inside the mind than for a psychologist to understand what's happening inside the body, which can be described and seen and tested. You know, you can't do a test to be like, are you depressed? I guess you can do an assessment, but you can't do a test that comes up with it. So what I've found is that my area of expertise, combined with very careful consideration and collaboration with the other fields involved, allows me to get into that middle ground space that everybody needs somebody to do. And somebody's got to do it confidently. Dr. Sarno did this from the medical side. He realized, I'm going to have to get into psychology some. He brought in Dr. Arlene Feinblatt, who worked with him, and he relied on her, but he also gained some confidence that he could say some things on the other side of things. And I'm kind of doing that from the other side.
Fantastic. So let's step back and look at what is actually chronic pain, or what is the kind of chronic pain that you're helping people with, and what is TMS? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, well, let's start with chronic pain. One thing that I often like to do is to dismantle the word chronic. Chronic means unbroken in time. You know, the way we think about chronic symptoms, though, we tend to think of them as symptoms that cannot be broken. And there's a big difference between the two. So I talk about the symptoms that I work with that are supposedly chronic as consistently acute. What that means is it's always there, yes, but it is an acute process over and over and over. Big difference between that and chronicity in the way that we think about it. if we're going to break these things, we have to be able to recognize these are moment to moment acute conditions. They just happen to be the same moments over and over and over, because the thought process is what leads to the physiology. So now let's get into what TMS is. TMS is a term that Dr. Sarno created to try to describe this condition where the mind was creating an actual physical process that could be incredibly painful. And when he was first looking at it, he was mostly just studying back pain. He had been seeing lots of people with chronic pain, but back pain in particular. And he was finding he was not getting good results with physical efforts to get them better. So what he did notice, though, is that when he talked to them about their psychological experience, they started to get better in certain ways. And he, being the good scientist that he was, and this is an important distinction. It doesn't matter what degree we have to be good scientists. We have to not throw out data. We have to think about the truth. We have to think about how these things converge. Dr. Sarno did a beautiful job of that. He is an all-time hero of mine for this reason. I mean, he also saved my life with his writing. But what he described is that a certain conditions in the mind could lead to changes in the body and in the muscles. And when he was first, I shouldn't say when he was first thinking about this, but as it evolved, he came to think of the process as being about oxygen deprivation to the muscles. That something about the way the mind was working was changing the oxygen flow to the muscles, and that was making it sore, which makes some logical sense at first glance, at least, because that is part of what makes muscles sore. You know, lactic acid buildup comes because we're not getting enough oxygen. And that happens when you're doing, a big workout. He called it tension myositis syndrome as a way to try to describe the tenseness of the muscles. What ended up happening, though, is he started to realize this goes well beyond just the muscles. This goes into many different parts of the body. But by then, the term had kind of been around and stuck. So the term TMS, as I now think about it, is an equivalent for what I call mind-body issues. I don't call it a syndrome or a disorder, because that actually feeds the kind of doubt that people have. That I'm very careful about the language that we sign on to. You could see it with consistently acute versus chronic, because if we feed certain language, then it gives certain ideas. And the idea that something could be chronic puts us in a certain mindset. The idea that we have a disorder, that puts us in a mindset that's harder to overcome, or a syndrome. The way I think about it is, this is the human condition. We all have mind-body experiences. Think about it this way. When we get embarrassed, our blood flow actually changes. We blush. When we are sad, that's an emotion. Our tear ducts change. We cry. We have all kinds of things like this. We can get freaked out by something. Our skin changes and we get goosebumps. The interesting thing is, people don't think it extends to pain, and there's no reason it wouldn't. The mind controls all of these processes, or at least it can. And so any process that's available in the body can be controlled by the mind. TMS is one term that is used for this. I kind of shy away from terms, as you're probably gathering. But I do think it's useful to have that shared language to understand when people are saying that. Oh, I get it. Now, listen, if you Google TMS, the first thing that will come up is this other treatment for depression that uses magnetism. That is not this TMS.
Well, and I really appreciate your careful attention to language. And you, and I want to put this out for the listeners as well, have this wonderful YouTube channel and podcast called Crushing Doubt. And you talk a lot about this condition and how you work with it. Tell us a little, for those people who are really new to this, how do you work with people? So someone comes to you, maybe they've gone from doctor to doctor, they've gotten some diagnosis, whether it's IBS or fibromyalgia or chronic pain or headaches, and they've tried all sorts of things, maybe in the physical realm, from supplements to treatments, right? And then they come to you.
So first of all, let me acknowledge, most people do come to me having been through many, many treatments. Usually they don't come to even the mind-body perspective in general until they've been through many treatments. That happened for me too. I went to doctors, I went to physical therapists, I went to a chiropractor, I went to an acupuncturist. This field is becoming more known, which is great, but it is the field that people tend to get to as the last resort. And then they start to hear about it. So that's an important point just from the start. But then people also tend to come to me having been through a lot of mind-body work. And the reason that I think they end up coming to me is related to my own experience, because I read Sarno and it was incredibly helpful to me. And it got me, I'd say, about 60% better, maybe 70%. But I realized, you know what? I'm not feeling totally comfortable with all of it. I had questions. I had things I was confused about. I had fears that were lingering, and I wanted help with that. So I went to see a guy named Eric Sherman. I love Eric. Eric trained under Dr. Sarno and Arlene Feinblatt, and I wanted him to see me kind of like as a mind-body specialist. But he really, the way he does his practice is he is a therapist who understands mind-body work. And I was working with a therapist at the time, and he was like, oh, I don't want to interfere with that relationship, which I understand, but it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted like a mind-body technician. And so what I decided is, you know what? I need to be somebody who is not a mind-body informed therapist. I need to be a therapy informed mind-body expert. And so when people come to see me, that's usually what they're looking for. They don't want to get into therapy with me. They want me to cure their symptoms. They want me to help them get them under control. So the way that I work with people is a way that I found to work with myself, which is, it's a lot of psychoeducation. It's a lot of talking about how do you understand this whole mind-body perspective? Because what I found is when I got my questions answered and when I got my confusion ironed out and my fears dialed down, then everything that Dr. Sarno said was still true, but even more so, even better. So I went to this session with Eric Sherman, the one, and I said to him, okay, do you mind if I ask you some questions? He said, sure. I asked him probably 200 questions in one meeting because I just had so many, and he answered them really beautifully and helpfully. And that one session, I wouldn't say it helped me more than Sarno, because Sarno was the primary thing that helped me, but it was the second most important thing that happened to me. That session answered so many of my questions. And then I started doing that for myself. When I realized that helped, I started doing research into things and saying, you know what? I don't know what this part is about. How do I explain this? An example is, what is actually happening in the physiology? When Sarno said that it was oxygen deprivation, much as I love Sarno, and I think he even acknowledged this, it didn't seem to explain everything. I've heard, anecdotes that he himself was like, yeah, I understand. It doesn't explain everything. It's a part of the equation. So I was trying to figure out what the full equation was. And ironically, I got it from Sarno anyway, because in Sarno's book, The Divided Mind, he mentions a woman named Candace Pert who wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion. And in that book, he said you can get a full explanation of what's happening physiologically in the mind-body process. So I said, well, I got to read this. And I read it. And what I found is, oh, wow, okay, this does explain a lot of stuff. Now, Molecules of Emotion is a great read, but it's not like it is about this. This is in the background. What it really is about is the journey of this woman in the scientific field, the misogynistic things she runs into, the challenges that she runs into, the science that she had breakthroughs on, including discovering the dopamine receptor, really big things. Very interesting. It's more of a biography than anything else. But within it, you can get the information that the thing that is controlling the entire body from the mind is this thing called peptides. Peptides are the messengers between the brain and every cell in the body. And essentially what happens is that the brain can control every cell in the body in any way that it works by ordering it with peptides. It helped me so much to feel like, now it makes sense, because let's take oxygen deprivation. Peptides controlled the oxygen deprivation in the first place. Now it was making sense. Okay, this is why the mind can cause us to cry. It can cause us to blush. It can cause goosebumps. It can cause chronic pain. It can cause itching. It can cause foggy brain. It can cause some kind of gut reaction. Now we had an explanation that covered everything. And that's the kind of thing that I look for, to bring all of the information together in all kinds of convergent ways, so that when I do actually bring it to the other person, it's incredibly convincing and it reduces all of their doubt about it, which is the whole reason it's called crushing doubt.
Right. And that's really interesting to me, because what you're really, if I'm understanding it correctly, saying here, there is a misfiring. And I think on your website, you call it a benign reversible process between body and mind. So how can our mind, or our brain, I should rather say, impact peptides so that we don't feel pain?
Okay, so I'll get into that. One thing I want to say though is I'm even careful about the words that I choose. You know, when I say benign, I often like to say, hey, it's not going to feel benign. A lot of times these symptoms are the absolute worst pain or the worst discomfort anyone has ever had. So I don't mean benign in a dismissive sort of way, but I do mean it in an encouraging sort of way. I say to people, it can hurt, but it cannot harm, which is a really important distinction. That can dial down the fear, even if it's really uncomfortable. I think the gist with respect to peptides, you know, you were asking, well, how can the brain control the peptides, right? But the peptides are the brain. You know, the way I think about it is your entire body is a brain. This is just all one brain. I find thinking about it that way is helpful, because the second anything changes in your mind process, your body also changes. And we already know this to be true. Think about it from the perspective of, if you're being chased by a lion, your entire body changes. You've got cortisol flowing, adrenaline flowing, your heart's pumping fast, you're breathing heavy. You're ready for flight, or maybe fight, but probably not in the case of a lion. The mind doesn't distinguish between a lion and asking out a pretty girl or giving a public speech. There's almost no distinction whatsoever. The mind just knows it's in danger. And this is where I love trauma work, and this is part of our overlap. One of the reasons that I refer people to EMDR all the time is that I find that if people are going to be working on the therapy side of things, because I work more on the informational side of things, trauma so much needs to be addressed. And I'm much more trusting of therapists who are trauma informed. One of the reasons for that is that trauma is part of what tells us how much the body changes from the mind. It's just radically different. In fact, if you are just sitting there and you're suddenly thinking about something that made you angry before, you can get angry and your body responds as if you're angry. And the same is true for what I call being in trauma. I'm pretty sure you'll agree with this quite a bit as an EMDR therapist, but I do help people recognize when are you in trauma or not. And I do it for myself too. And it's not always intuitive. You know, you can have moments where you're like, yeah, I didn't like that so much. But then you're like, I must have really not liked that. Like, I'm not thinking straight. I just feel not good. You know, there's all kinds of ways that you can recognize you're in trauma. But I think it's really key to recognize that the peptides are they're just following the laws of the brain. You know, if you're feeling this, they do this. If you're feeling this, they do this. If you're have a mind-body interaction going on in this way, they do that. They're just following orders. But it all flows from the mind. So it's really, once the mind goes a certain way, there's all kinds of commands that happen. That's the same thing as like if you get angry or you get sad or you get excited or you're going to sleep, different messages are being sent.
So what went wrong, right? You make the trauma connection. What led to this sort of misfiring, or this process that's gone awry a little bit, right? So trauma might be one element, but what happened that now somebody has this chronic pain or fibromyalgia or IBS or any of these conditions?
So I'm going to bring in the columns now, if that's okay, because
Please do.
the columns are essentially three different descriptions of how this can begin. One is something that I refer to as the emotions column. Now, these are called columns because I actually have people write down in columns something called a mind-body map so that they can understand themselves from a mind-body perspective. The emotions column is the one that is the most common for the onset and uptick in symptoms. If you have a sudden sharp pain out of nowhere, that usually is related to a largely unconscious emotion. These emotions can lead to a physical expression that is designed, it is meant to tell you that you're suffering and upset, and it's also meant to hide that at the same time. And the way it does it is through a physical symptom, because then you can know you're in discomfort for sure, but you don't know why. Sarno referred to this as a distraction, that the physicality of it distracts from the emotion of it, keeps it unconscious. He's not wrong about that, but it's only a part of the puzzle. In any case, the second cause comes from something I call the doubt column. This is when the way that you are thinking about things, not feeling, but the way you're thinking about things, makes you feel in danger or makes you feel an expectation for certain things. So when I started to develop some back pain, the first thing I felt was a little twinge when I was tying my shoes. And I remember this. Right there, I said, what if? What? And those are key words. What if? What if this becomes a chronic thing? That was a way that I was thinking about things. Now, what led to the twinge in the first place? Probably something emotional. What then took over was the doubt process. What if this becomes this? And here's the thing. The doubt column is the most important column in terms of the thing we have to combat all the time. And that is because it's the thing that makes things chronic. If we knew about that and we didn't have that at all, we would just have moments, acute moments of suffering that relate to emotion or not. But what usually happens is we get these acute things and then we start to worry. Now, worry and fear, that's a part of doubt. That's one of the 4 types of doubt I list. It's lack of certainty, confusion, questions, and fear. So when you start to worry, you're already into doubt. You're headed towards a supposed chronic condition. The good news is it can be broken at any second if you understand this. That's where consistently acute versus chronic comes in. So the way that we think about things is what's determining this. And meanwhile, society is just feeding us more and more fear all over the place. They're not dealing with trauma very well, which only adds to fear. They're telling us that our bodies break down very easily and never recover. That leads to fear. They're misinterpreting certain pieces of scientific information or ignoring the science altogether. As an example, herniated discs don't cause back pain. There are countless studies over and over and over that show there is absolutely no correlation between disc herniations and back pain. In their journals, in the New England Journal of Medicine, all the top journals, they're not getting that. Instead, they look at the image and they say, but look, it's right there. And I say, yes, I'm not denying it's right there. The question is the interpretation. What does it actually mean? Your own science is telling us, no, that's not what's causing it. It's incidental. A lot of these structural issues are incidental. Arthritis is one that blew my mind. When I was growing up, and I'm sure it was true for you because I think we're relatively similar ages, I heard the word arthritis and I would associate to pain right away. Well, as it turns out, there's no correlation between arthritis and pain. None. These are physical degenerative experiences that don't cause pain. And if you think about it, we've got tons of examples of these that don't cause pain. Your eyes get worse over time. Your hearing gets worse over time. Your skin gets wrinkled. Your muscles atrophy. This is not pretty or exciting things, but none of it hurts. And here they are saying this hurts. So the illogic of that is part of where I work. I start to cut through all of this illogic. And we look at convergent evidence when it comes to science and logic over and over and over until people are very clear, oh, you know what? Even though I thought you were describing the outlandish theory, your theory makes much more sense. These other theories are kind of insane if you think about it. I don't mean that as an insult to anyone who has believed in them, because I did too. We were taught to believe in these things. What I do is I start to call into question certain assumptions and change things. So the doubt column is a way that these symptoms can start to evolve if we start thinking about things wrong, and we're getting all kinds of bad messages.
No, I was going to say now your 200 questions make sense to me. You were asking these 200 questions to overcome your own doubt and to get all the science, all the answers, so you could really have a clear picture and not have fear or worry or uncertainty in the doubt column.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before I discovered Dr. Sarno, I was working with a chiropractor who I love. He's a fantastic guy. And he's the one who introduced me to Sarno, by the way, even though he was more skeptical of Sarno than I am. But he was doing certain things in chiropractic work that were helping, but I couldn't understand why. And that just didn't sit well with me. I was like, well, if I can't understand why, how can I really fully believe in it? What ended up happening, I think, is he was mostly helping me because he was making me feel much less in danger. I'm sure the physical manipulation helped in certain ways also, but he was making me feel safe and cared for.
And that makes me think, and this is a whole other topic, but how important bedside manners are, right? That any healthcare provider makes a person feel safe and like they're not in danger.
I mean, short of competence, I think that is the most important thing. And it's not being taught well, I don't think, in medical schools. And on top of it, the poor doctors, I do have to sympathize with them about this. They're being bombarded with cases and expected to see them in 5 minutes and dealing with insurance companies and paperwork and all kinds of horrible things. This is part of what I do, is I want to free us as a society from all of these limiting factors. We have to rehaul a lot of things. And I think a lot of doctors would agree with that. Before I lose the thread, though, of the third column, just because I want to keep that in place, it's another source of symptoms, is what I call the power column. Now, the power column is your relationship with yourself. And when you're not happy with yourself, which the vast majority of people don't tend to be for a while, there's a reason so many people go to therapy and are looking for so many things and trying so many things to change. When you're not kind of in alignment with yourself, there are times where the symptoms are there to tell you, instead of distracting you, they're trying to communicate with you. Something's wrong here. You cannot keep living this way. And if we can interpret that, if we can receive the message, we can alleviate the symptoms that way too. So each column gives you a way to interpret what is happening and some things that you can do about it. But the greatest thing about it is I've looked at this very, very carefully because I tried to get all my questions answered. I try to get everybody's questions answered. I have found that these 3 columns encompass the whole thing. There's nothing that I'm finding outside of it. There are things that I find that are new that I can fold into it very easily. But this framework sets it up so we can understand each major type of mind-body interaction.
That's incredible. And I know that your work often tends to be 4 to 8 sessions. So it's very time limited, right? It's not years and years of therapy, but your work is really, it's quite time limited and it's very science, logic, and reason driven while being very mindful of emotions.
I'd say that is a very accurate description of it. For multiple reasons, I'm finding that's the most helpful way of going about it. What I was finding is that I was helping people get cured of the symptoms, or getting to a point where they'd master them. Cured is it's a tricky word because it's the human condition to continue having symptoms, in an acute sort of way from time to time, at least. But what I was finding is I would get the symptoms very much under control, and then we were doing therapy afterwards that was informed by what we had found out. What I came to realize, though, is what people need and what I wanted. I had to free up my time to be able to do more of the beginning part. And now I work in conjunction with people like you. So I will help people get all of that mind-body information they need, which, by the way, is incredibly informative for therapy. It's almost like one of the best tools preparing someone for therapy, because then they can come in and hit the ground running. They know, oh yeah, this is what happened to me. I had 20 years of therapy before I discovered this stuff. And I had not figured out my central traumas, even with people telling me sometimes, or trying to. It's different to be told it by someone else than to be told it by your own body and realize, oh my God, this is true.
So really what struck me when you talked about the power column is that signaling function. Now, when I work with clients and let's say somebody comes to me and has panic attacks, and I don't pathologize that. I say, okay, this is a signal. Your body, your mind is communicating to you that something is off, out of balance. And you're kind of saying the same, right? That pain, this consistently acute pain, can be a signal that something is off, and it's really sort of almost an invitation to look deeper and to look at, okay, what's going on with that? Is it emotions? Is it doubt? Is it power? Is it trauma? Is that correct? Yeah.
That's absolutely right. There are two things that I do in the power column. One is I help people construct a core narrative. And the core narrative is, it's 3 sentences that are meant to describe the following. 1, what is the central suffering me? Now, we all have different parts of ourselves, but what's the central story of me and how I've suffered? Is sentence 1. Sentence 2 is, how did that impact me? What are the real life ways that it altered things? Did I stay away from relationships? Did I punish myself? Did I choose a career I didn't like? Did I find alienation with people? It can go on. And these can be long sentences, by the way. And the third sentence is, now what can I do? What am I planning to do generally, in a broad sense, to live differently from that? So my core narrative has a lot to do with validity. Part of sentence 3 for me is, I'm not going to subject myself to any situation where I am made to feel invalid or feel invalid myself. And if I do start to feel that, I'm going to make an adjustment that reclaims my power in that situation. A lot of times that's not even external. It's just within the self. I remind myself, no. This person's treating you as invalid. It doesn't mean you are. Like, that's an adjustment right there. So, actually, I was going to say the second part of what I do in the power column, but one thing I want to say is I help people come up with something that I call action steps, but this is another piece of language that I need to be more specific about. I like to help people see that thinking differently is an action. So many of my action steps are just new ways of thinking, better ways of thinking, which is very in line with therapy, but it's very targeted. One of the reasons that I love the work that I do, and I think is so effective, is I separate out separate problems. You know, I'm sure you're familiar with this. In therapy, sometimes we can sit with people and think, okay, there's a lot here. And they can think, oh my God, how do I sort this out? The columns helps us break everything down into little parts. So when I'm talking about the power column as an example, the core narrative is one problem. How do I identify the central suffering me, and what do I do about it? The other part of the power column is from a moment-to-moment perspective. And moment-to-moment perspectives are important in all 3 of the columns. I like to help people recognize, just because you've been the same way your whole life doesn't mean you're stuck there. It just means you've been having the same moments because you've been having the same mindset. If you change your mindset, you can have a whole different experience. So one of the things that I do in the power column is help people assess, am I in power right now with myself, with other people, and with my symptoms? And if I'm not in power, what's the powerful move that can get me back to it?
That's cool. And it's making me think of something that you write on your website, I think, or maybe in one of your videos, that you're not the cause of your pain, but you are the solution. And that for me is power too, right? We can't control what happened to us earlier in life, accidents, trauma, things like that, right? But we are the solution as adults with adult brains and resources and so on. And that in and of itself, even recognizing that, for me is a power move in a way.
Oh, I think it is. A lot of what I say are action steps that are meant to give power or reduce doubt. Because I found that Dr. Sarno and much of the mind-body world, they're doing great work, but they tend to focus on the emotions column side of things more. Sarno, though, is where I really learned about doubt first. It's that the interesting thing is I took him more seriously about it than even he did in a way. I was like, ooh, he knew how important it was to accept the diagnosis and not have doubts about it. I came to feel it is important to not have doubts about any of it. We have to get to all of it. It's got to make sense to you fully. And So, applying things in a doubt column or power column situation where we're giving ourselves more powerful interpretations or ways of doing things, it really changes your life. And in fact, that statement, one of the reasons I like to say it in reverse is it helps with a particular worry that people have. I say, just because you are the solution does not mean you were the cause. It's the corollary to what you said, right?
Yeah, taking the blame out, because there's
Exactly.
blame and guilt.
I'll finish up on this, but there's so much worry people have that if this is mind body, that means I caused it. No, you didn't. Just because you can be the resolution does not mean you caused it.
That's such a hopeful statement. I really like that. And I think whenever there is any kind of ailment, physical, emotional, and as we have learned, they're really not disconnected, there's often blame or guilt or shame around that. I could ask you so many more things, and I always run into this problem when I do these interviews. I'm like, there's so much I want to talk about. You have so many cool thoughts about black and white thinking, moment to moment thinking. So we're going to post some videos from your YouTube channel in the notes to this video so that people can follow up on it, because I think there's so much richness in what you do. I've learned from it, and I started to apply it in my therapeutic work. So it's really, really neat. One thing I do want to ask you, and I ask this of everyone I interview, I have this sort of tagline that befriending our emotions is the most rational thing we can do. So I like to ask people, what does befriending emotions mean to you? Why do you think it's important, if it is? And what are your favorite tools and skills to do so?
So first of all, I think what you're saying is really at the heart of the matter, especially about the power column for me. But I think it really fits with all the columns in a way. The way that I think about my emotions and my symptoms, I do think of them as my friends. I think of them as information, even the ones that hurt. I think, thank God for them. They're telling me what's going on. The problem people run into is that they don't have the tools to interpret them. So then how could you call them friends? They're just torturous. They're not fun at all, and they just feel like the enemy. When you have the tools to interpret them, then they truly are your best friends. There's a line that I say that your body is the most empathic entity you have. No one is in your corner as much as your body. If you are slighted in the smallest degree, your body is going to object. Doesn't like it. It is in your corner. So this is where self-empathy lies, in our symptoms, in our emotions. And sometimes we see them as the enemy, and I understand how we could, but if we look at it from this angle, especially if we bring in like a power column perspective, we realize that your emotions are guiding you. They want the best for you. They're never wrong. Your body's never wrong. Your symptoms are never wrong. Your feelings are never wrong. They are guiding you in the right direction. Now, it is the case that we could misinterpret what we're seeing and go down a rabbit hole or develop certain problems because of it. So we have to be careful about that. But if we really understand the theory behind what these feelings and thoughts and symptoms are saying, we can get that message. It's one of the reasons I like the core narrative. It's one of my tools. It allows you to, and actually all the columns, they allow us to get more specific about what is all of this information we're getting. Otherwise, we're just getting too much information. I don't use the columns to simplify where simplification is not possible, because I don't like to do anything that doesn't make sense, because that defeats the whole purpose. But I do find that this organizational structure allows people to discover certain things by keeping certain things out of the picture for the moment. Like, okay, I'm going to look at my relationships with other people. You can keep your relationship with you out of it for a second and just say, how do I feel in relation to this person? Are they making me feel not powerful? Is that coming from them? Is it coming from me? Is it situational? You start to get into the specifics. And I find that as you work out each specific, other specifics start to come clear.
Well, I was just making my heart sing, because that listening to our body and seeing our body as our ally is such a huge factor in healing. And we live in such a disembodied culture, right? That we do see our body as enemy or the symptoms as enemies, but really our body wants to help us and it's rooting for us and protecting us. And
sometimes it's even demanding that we live better. My body is the best friend I ever had.
yeah. So we better be good to it, right? That's kind of what
Good job.
exactly. Good job. Well, Dan, what a delight. I'm going to post lots of resources and really encourage people to follow you, to check out your YouTube channel, your podcast, because there's so much good information in there, even just for understanding emotions better, or doubt, power, emotions, which is really something we all grapple with and could all use a better understanding of. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for taking the time with me, Katja, for your interest in this, for spreading this around. But I also want to say it's really gratifying to hear that someone as attuned to things and insightful as you is seeing the value in integrating this into your work. So really a pleasure to hear, and I thank you for your time.